If you look across the country, there are young Republican clubs in almost every major city. The Young Republicans are places where young people who are like-minded can meet other young people. They can get involved in local political races. They can get involved in their local communities and try and have an impact for the conservative movement. One of the most interesting things about that is if you sort of compare all these different young Republican clubs, you would think that the most lively, the most active and vibrant clubs would be in deep red states like Texas or Florida. But that's not really the case. Those states have their clubs and they're great. But one of the most active and flourishing young Republicans clubs in the country is actually in New York. They have their clubhouses in Manhattan, a place where 85% of the population voted for Hillary Clinton. This is a club that's headed by Gavin, who's joining us. Gavin, thanks for being here. Gavin has been the president of the New York Young Republicans Club for the past several years. He's also an activist, a commentator, a columnist, and a political operator. Gavin's an ambassador for Turning Point and Live Action. You've probably seen him on Fox News or Fox Business. He's also been on Newsmax and OAN. He is a very active, prolific writer, including for DC Inquirer, so you can find some of his work there. Gavin, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Brandon. It's great to be on and great to be speaking with you today about the club and all the work we're doing here in the belly of the beast, New York City.
Right. It's kind of the political heart of darkness for a conservative. So, Gavin, just give us some background on the club. 5 years ago, the club wasn't what it is today. So tell us, how did you find the club? What state was it in? And give us a bit of the backstory.
Absolutely. Well, like you mentioned, the club is a storied institution. We are the oldest young Republican club in the country. Frankly, probably the oldest Republican club in the country. The current iteration of the club was founded in 1911, but it goes back all the way to 1856 with the founding of the party and the nomination of Abraham Lincoln as the Republican Party candidate in the 1860 election. So it has a very long, storied history, a lot of famous members over the years. It's been a political force in New York City and New York State for over a century. But that wasn't always the case. It's ebbed and flowed in terms of its activity, in terms of its successes, in terms of its stature. When I took over the club in April of 2019, it was kind of on its last leg. There was only a few dozen members. There was very little money in the bank account. The events were, few and far between, sparsely attended. It was really kind of an organization on its last leg, and really only had this sort of legacy to hang on. But beyond that, it was sort of failing, and it really had also devolved into very much a rhino club, very liberal and moderate in terms of its ideological leanings. When we took over the club in April of 2019, we completely professionalized it. We completely changed its direction. We certainly moved it towards MAGA, America First, pro-Trump, against the advice and counsel of many of its former members. And what we saw over the past few years is that we created a network. We created a parallel structure here in New York. We created some place where conservatives and populists could come together, could meet other like-minded people, could hear great speeches from conservative thinkers and commentators from across the country. They can get active and engaged with political campaigns, and they could also just have fun at socials. We built it as a holistic organization. Many people said just do one thing or the other. Just do campaigns, don't do socials, or just do socials, don't do campaigns. Just have speakers, don't do anything else. We're building a fully fledged institution, and because of that, we rose from a few dozen members in 2019. Now we have over 1,200 dues-paying members. We have a clubhouse, our own headquarters here in Manhattan. We're the only young Republican club in the country to have their own physical space. Our gala is attended by over 500-600 people. I know you've been a guest at many of them, and this year we're going to be at Cipriani Wall Street, which is the largest and most exclusive event venue in the city of New York. And we grew it as a volunteer organization. I don't get paid. No one else gets paid. A completely volunteer-run organization. Now we're a $750,000 a year org in terms of our revenue between the gala and our events and our membership dues and everything else. So we're very happy that we've built up such a large and formidable political force that has helped elect Republicans here in deep blue New York, either whether it's on the city council or the state assembly or the state senate or even Congress. We've had boots on the ground. We've staffed those offices with our members. We're kind of creating like a mini, like a junior league for, or a feeder system, like in baseball terms, like a feeder system to the major leagues. So we're very happy to do that and continue to do that. And we don't have, massive institutional backing, massive donor backing. We're not a Beltway establishment org. We're funded by our members, supported by our members. We remain true to the grassroots, and we're very happy to see this model flourish in New York. And we're seeing similar models take root in places like DC and Palm Beach and across the country.
And I think that's one of the amazing things. Danielle and I used to live in New York, and we would go to some of the events. And every time we would go, they're filled with people. They're not rhinos. They're not establishment people. They're hardcore pro-Trump, pro-America first people in New York, again, of all places. We've been to your gala the past several years, and I think Marjorie Taylor Greene and some other people have spoken, and it's always, it's a huge party. It's a lot of fun. So tell me, you come in 4 or 5 years ago, the club doesn't exist. What is it that you saw in this club that you wanted to resurrect?
Well, look, I think the conservative movement writ large needs to do more work in cities and with young professionals. I think you look at New York City, and we've seen a lot of commentators say, run from the cities, flee the cities, run and hide. And I think that's the sort of losing mentality that has put Republicans and conservatives on the back foot. We have to stop ceding ground. We have to stop running. I'm not saying we're going to flip a place like New York City overnight. I'm not saying we're going to ever flip it, in fact, but I'm saying we need to keep an active presence in the cities, because these are places that inform our media, our financial system, all the major institutions and the cultural levers of power, if you will, are based in these cities, in these cosmopolitan areas like New York. And if we simply, completely cede ground there, we're basically letting the left run amok, and we have no presence in these institutions and in these centers where culture is determined, where the media is established, where the financial institutions make their decisions. And you see many young professionals who grew up in conservative households, who are conservative. They move to places like New York. They're moving up their career, whether it's in finance or law or media or whatever, and they eventually drift away from their conservative leanings because they don't have any sort of support network in these places, because it's so dominated by the mainstream leftist orthodoxy. So a club like ourselves, even though we're in deep blue New York and we may not have all the electoral wins as, say, a club in Texas or Florida, we provide a valuable outlet to maintain a sort of Republican conservative professional class. And these are the type of people that would staff a future administration. These are the type of people that would staff an elected office. These are the type of people that we want to remain true to their conservative roots as they advance in their career and become decision makers in their own right. So I think it's super important. And I think even if you look electorally, states like Pennsylvania, states like New York, et cetera, you don't have to win the cities. You don't have to win Philadelphia. You don't have to win New York. But if you get the numbers on the margins, if you move, say, New York City from, the mid-20s in terms of Republicans to like 33, you flip New York. And we even saw this past cycle, Lee Zeldin came very close. And I would say his loss can largely be attributed to his numbers in New York City. And had his numbers moved, say, to 30, 31, 33% in the city, not winning New York, but moving it on the margins because there's so many people here, you could have seen us flip this state in the gubernatorial race. Likewise, in a place like, PA with Philadelphia, we just saw Trump there with tons of crowds coming out for him. You move the numbers there, all of a sudden, we take PA back. So we need an urban strategy. We need a young professional strategy. We put a lot of emphasis on the colleges, which is only 4 years. You put all these emphasis on campus, but campus, you're at best getting 4 years out of them. And where they live on campus is not where they vote. The young professional organizations such as the YRs, that's really where you're going to get close to 20 years of their life, from 80 or over 20, so 80 to 40, 18 to 40, and that's where they're really, starting a family, starting a business, becoming established in their career. That's the demographic group that we need to maintain, that we need to strengthen. I'm very happy the club can be part of that.
Right. I think that's exactly right. Whether we as conservatives like it or not, New York is one of the major cultural centers for the country and the entire world. And you can say the same thing to maybe a little bit lesser extent, but you can say the same thing about most major cities. They are cultural hubs. and they're places that we can't just cede ground in. I think what's interesting about what you guys are doing is whenever you think about, getting involved in a far left area like New York City, kind of the typical strategy is to moderate a little bit, to kind of be more like the city. If you're in New York, to be more like the sort of staid establishment Republicans there, to be soft on social issues, on immigration and things like that. And you guys have actually done the exact opposite of that. So tell me about how, what's the thought behind that strategy? And it's obviously worked really well for you, but tell us about that.
No, you said it right. It's certainly counterintuitive, and many people certainly advised us against it. They told us, continue being establishmentarian, be very moderate, be even liberal. That's the only way, you're going to get Republicans in deep blue New York. And look, that was the strategy the club under previous administrations had been run, and it did nothing. I mean, if they had really built a really effective and large establishment-style, liberal, moderate-style Republican club, I could at least respect the competence, and I can at least respect, their ability to grow an org. But they weren't even able to do that. But I think really what it boils down to is when you're in such a deep blue place, when you're in such a liberal hotbed, a leftist hotbed, the Republicans and conservatives that exist in those areas, they're hardcore because they're under constant pressure to validate their views, to defend their views, to fight off accusations of racism and whatever it is they attack Republicans for. They're battle hardened. They're in the trenches every day by virtue of being a conservative in a place like New York. It's very easy to be a Republican in a deep red state. It's very easy to be a conservative in a deep red state because all, the political infrastructure and in many cases the culture is still very conservative. But in a place like New York, you're really going against the grain. You're very counterculture. And because of that, you need to embrace that counterculture. You need to be against something. You can't just be a moderated version of the Dems. You can't be just like Democrat light. People are looking for an alternative. They're looking for an alternative worldview. They're looking for an alternative set of policies and philosophies by which to govern their city and the country as a whole. And they're not looking for watered down Democrat policies. They're looking for you to provide a completely holistic alternative vision. So that's why I think being stalwart conservatives and populists here in New York has paid off well, because the people that are here, the pockets of Republicans and conservatives that are here, and there are many, they like that. They embrace it. They welcome it. And really no benefit to moderate your views, because even, the moderate Republicans don't even win elections here. The moderate liberal Republicans don't win elections anymore. In fact, the type of Republicans we've begun to see win elections in New York City and the metropolitan area have been Trump-style Republicans. And in fact, if you look at the numbers for, say, the margins that shifted between 2016 and 2020, there was big margin shifts in terms of the percent shift between Trump's numbers in 16 and 20 in places like New York, in these outer borough, working class, socially conservative, economically populist areas. Many of them are white working class, many of them are Hispanic working class, and they're changing the face of the Republican Party. The Republican Party in New York is no longer the Rockefeller Republican Party of 40, 50 years ago. They're no longer these moderate Northeast establishment, waspy guys. They're turning into sort of these populist style figures. And Trump himself is a man from Queens. He's a New Yorker, and he sort of embraces that sort of outer borough, rough and tumble, populist style rhetoric and energy. And that's kind of what made him so successful at the national stage in many ways. So we're embracing that same, persona. And I would tell people that New York is much larger than just Manhattan. I mean, there's over 8 million people in New York. It's bigger than many states. It's bigger than many countries. And the outer boroughs are very different than Manhattan. And, you go to a place like Staten Island, it's voting Republicans 60, 70%, almost as much as I guess in Alabama. You go to places like South Brooklyn or Northeast Queens, these are very strong Republican hotbeds. So maybe we're only a quarter to a third of the city, but a quarter to a third of 8 million is a sizable number. So there still are many of us, and they're not looking for watered down Republicanism. They're looking for an alternative vision. And if they wanted a watered down Republican, they can go vote for a quote unquote moderate Dem. I mean, and those guys are still around. They're not really moderate. They're not very sensible, but they certainly exist. So I think the counterintuitive approach has worked. We've tapped into it, and by the numbers, by the metrics in terms of our finances, our event attendance, our membership, we've seen massive growth. And I would encourage other similar organizations in deep blue areas, not to shy away from their beliefs and principles, but to stand firm on them and to provide their members and their constituents with an alternative vision, not just a watered down Democrat light Pepsi, Diet Pepsi style conservative.
Right. No, I think we sort of live in an age of authenticity, right? If I remember whenever Danielle and I would walk down the street in New York and you would see these massive old churches. They were beautiful buildings. And a lot of them would have trans pride flags and gay pride flags and things like that. And the thing you consistently noticed is that all of these churches were empty. They were dead. And I think it's because nobody wants these hollowed out, ideological, sort of weak, limp-wristed people. Nobody wants that anymore. They don't want it in their faith. They don't want it politically. They're not looking for, like you said, the Rockefellers of New York to be the opposition. They're looking for the people who actually talk and represent the working class people in Queens or Brooklyn or the Bronx or anywhere else. And you guys have done that really well. So, tell me, I think the Young Republicans, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you guys were one of the first, if not the first, sizable political group this year to endorse Trump, even before he even announced he was running.
Yes, you made a few great points that I want to return back to, but yes, we endorsed him a few hours before his official announcement. We now have a signed letter from the president, proudly hanging on the walls of our clubhouse. We came out swinging very early on for President Trump, who was the greatest president of my lifetime, and I think of in a few generations for sure, of the modern era, in terms of what he was able to get accomplished under the circumstances and in such a short period of time. I think, you look at that as a per capita success rate. You can't get much higher than that. And of course, we're always going to support our hometown hero on top of that. We got flack for it. We got attacked for it. But I think we made by far the right call based on the polling, based on the outpour of support for him. We endorsed him early on when, the polls were a lot tighter between him and DeSantis. And I'm sure we'll get into that primary discussion as this show goes on. But I also want to touch on what you said about the churches. And I think it's so spot on. We've seen an utter decline in these liberal woke churches, especially mainline Protestants. They've completely been hollowed out. They died. Their attendance has collapsed. And again, people are looking for individuals, for leaders, to rise to the occasion, and the occasion we're in right now, we're in a period of time where we need a fight. We need people to rise up and be willing to fight, to stand up, and to push back. We're not looking for this go along to get along attitude. We're not looking for pats on the head. We're not looking to get invited to the parties and the cocktail receptions in D.C. We're looking for people that are going to speak truth to power, even if it costs them, even if it makes them enemies, even if it gets them hated, because we're in a civilizational fight. We're in a fight for the heart and soul of our republic, and I think that also plays out spiritually for the heart and soul of the church and these various churches and other religious bodies. I think people are just sick and tired of the weakness, and I think they're looking for a champion. They're looking for a proxy. They're looking for someone who's going to take the hits and punch back, and I think that man is Donald J. Trump, and I think based on the polls, both in the primary and the general, people see him in the same light. So I fully agree with your comments on authenticity, and this is heightened particularly in the age of social media. They used to say, to be a good candidate, you need to have a voice for radio. And then it said, okay, well, then, you had the Nixon JFK debates in the 60s, you needed to have a face for television. Well, now I think you need to have the authenticity for social media. And I think that's what Trump has perfected in his online rhetoric. And many people would say, I like him, but his mean tweets. I would argue the opposite. I would say his mean tweets, his ability to fight, his ability to just represent himself and his own stream of consciousness. People like that rawness. They like that authenticity. They like the realness. They like knowing this is who he is, this is what he thinks. I can relate to that. They don't want, on the other hand, someone like a Ron DeSantis who is consultant driven, who is focus group approved, he runs everything by his team. He doesn't say anything that he hasn't gotten prior approval for. He's extremely constructed, extremely phony, and I think people are seeing through it, especially now with social media. It's a lot easier to see through these types of people, and that's why he's utterly failing, because he's running a campaign and a style of campaigning that may have worked 20, 30 years ago, but it's not working in the present, and it's certainly not going to work against a historic figure, such a revolutionary figure like Donald J. Trump. It simply won't.
No, I think you're exactly right. And last question, Gavin, before we have to go, and I think you've touched on it a little bit here, but the primary race is heating up. The only two real candidates in the field, I think, are Trump and DeSantis. None of the other candidates matter. They're irrelevant at this point. So what is the primary about? If you're going to boil it down to its core, to its essence, what is the Republican primary about? What are they fighting for?
I think most of them are vying for a cabinet spot. They're vying for media and to stay relevant. I think Christie is trying to stay relevant, get media, build up, I guess an email list and some donor lists, basic things to keep their brands going. I think a few others are vying for a cabinet spot. And I think then there's this other, this third group, which DeSantis is leading, where they're simply trying to create this neo-never-Trumpism. They're trying to replicate the strategies from 2015, 2016, and they're trying to take down Trump any way they can, to sabotage Trump, to divide the party, and to basically, force Trump, to have to fight out this fight that doesn't need to be fought, because he's overwhelmingly the leader of the party. The overwhelming majority of Republicans support him, approve of him, and they want to see him be the nominee. And he's obviously the best candidate to do so based on the only quantitative data we have, which is the polling. So I see it's one of the final, fights. Maybe the boss battle, if you will, where the establishment is using their last breaths to take out Trump and Trumpism, because they realize, if he were to win again, it would really be the nail in their coffin and the party would be fully transformed. I mean, we've been making a lot of historical analysis, but look, you look back at Goldwater, that conservative revolution back in the day in the 60s, it didn't get culminated until, Reagan came in office in the 80s. You're talking about a few decades there, where it took for the Republican Party to fully change. I think starting in 2015, 2016, the party's moving towards the populist wing, the America First wing, this sort of Trump movement. It's taking a few decades, and you even saw prototype movements like the Tea Party movement or the Liberty movement, which were sort of these grassroots, pushbacks against the establishment. So we're seeing, a multi-decade fight play out, but I think Trump has expedited everything, and because of that, this primary is getting extremely heated. It's getting extremely vicious, and I think they know they're failing and they're losing, and that's what kind of explains a lot of their rhetoric and a lot of their psychology, especially from their influencers and surrogates online, because Trump is so dominant, and they didn't expect him to be so dominant. They really thought that the indictments would take him down rather than make him a martyr, and rather than clarify that he is really the only threat against the establishment. And people saw the polling, say back in December of last year, where things were neck and neck, and they said, "Oh, Trump's done, Trump's over," and they made a stupid bet. Like many people make stupid bets, and they constantly bet against him, and they always underestimate him, and he always proves to be able to come back, to punch back harder and stronger than ever before. And that's really what we're seeing right now in this primary. And I think ultimately, a lot of the donor class, a lot of the consultant class type people, they really did believe, and they convinced people like DeSantis that Trump will be indicted, he'll be thrown in jail, his campaign will be destroyed, and you'll be able to walk in and fill the vacuum. And that's not happening, and no one's going to allow that to happen. And I think right now that's their only viable strategy. He's been campaigning for over a month, approaching, I guess, 2 months now, and he's seen no discernible movement upward in the polls. In fact, he's been declining in the polls in the primary. Meanwhile, Trump has only strengthened his position, including against Biden. And I think it's very possible to make the prediction that DeSantis doesn't win a single primary state going into 2024. And I think they're going to write textbooks and essays and articles about the failings of this campaign for the decades to come. But Trump is the invincible, political force. He knows no equal, and I think he's going to emerge stronger from this. And I love the idea of him returning to the White House with a vengeance and with a fire, and without the thought of a re-election, so he can do what he needs to do and clean up what needs to be cleaned up, and bring about an American national renewal, which he was doing quite effectively during his first term. So I'm looking forward to his second term, as many others.
Definitely got some unfinished business to clean up. So, Gavin, thanks for joining us. It's always fun to talk to you, to hang out. Tell us, how can people find you? Where, I know you're on social media. What's the best place to keep up with Gavin's thoughts?
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for having me. And you all can follow me at Gavin Wax, GavinWax. That's on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can follow my writings, gavinwax.com. I post all my articles there. And you can follow the club, the New York Young Republican Club, the oldest and largest Republican club in the country, strong allies of President Trump, at NYYRC. That's 2 Ys. And you can follow us on our website, nyyrc.com. You can join, you can donate. We appreciate all the support. Come to our events, our big gala, December 9th this year. We're going to have some great guests to be announced very soon. So hope to see you all there, and hope to see you there as well, Brandon.
You will see us there. Thank you, Gavin. We appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.